5 or 6 years ago with an internship at the ISC. That's when I met her for the first time, and we have started collaborating ever since. We have published papers with illustrations made by her. Now, if you go to the UNDARK project's website, you will see a lot of beautiful images. All of them are her work. And yeah, so she's been here for 2 months, working, collaborating, and now she's living in today's. So any questions, any comments, anything you want to, comment or discuss with her, you're welcome. So I don't think I have anything else to say. She's a freelance also, but she's also been working for scientific institutions, public institutions such as museums, all the projects, and also for the Cambridge University Press for 2 years. Okay, so without further ado, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction. So my name is Ève Barlier, and I'm here to present science with a brush, because quite often when a graphic designer ventures into a scientific institution, it's a bit of a shock, and we see forests of slides with a lot of images, text, equations that are longer than the Great Wall of China, and it doesn't have to be that way, actually. We can organize content, and it can still look smart, and even smarter if it's understandable. So, to present myself shortly, I'm a graphic designer and illustrator, and I'm specialized in scientific communication. And what I like to do is to present our world, our environment, from the smallest scales to the bigger scales. And initially, it was something relatively simple. I started by drawing moss, small microorganism, and I thought that the biggest could go to whales. But actually, I mean, whales the animal, but actually, little by little, I'm a bit of a people pleaser. And I started to draw things that were slightly impossible to draw, including particles, gluons, quarks. I've started with that to the biggest scale, so the universe in expansion. So actually, nowadays, there's no real limit to what I can communicate about. But I would say that dark matter and dark energy are still a big problem for me. So what I create is quite varied. It's all visual content, illustrations, diagrams, comics, posters, brochures, books. I've got a big menu. And I work for, as Jorge said, academic publishers, science museums like the Museum of Natural History in Paris and London, and research institutes like the ISC. And I've been heavily working with Jorge and other members of the ISC for about 6 years, also with the team, the UT3, the Unit of Communication. Within the Institute, I work for UNDARK, a project that has started last year, and I will present some examples. So I'm positioned a bit in between two chairs, art and science. I'm living in symbiosis. I'm not stealing anything, but I'm just trying to draw a connection between art and science. I work just in the middle. It's a weird kind of applied art that is called scientific communication. And it's actually art for science, but sometimes science can resonate into art as well. It can help a lot of things within Science Institute, and it can help facilitate communication, improve accessibility of content, catch attention, foster interest, promote results. So it can actually enhance all sorts of projects in science and give them a greater impact. So as I say, initially I started easy, working on meteorites, craters. I went a bit further in the sky, and I started producing posters with a bit of invention, explaining how we can identify meteorites, for example, how we can help finding new craters, observing meteors in the sky, and that both with scientific representations from historical sources, as well as new representations and stories, to just make it a bit more lively and to involve citizens in general in both research and just broadcasting knowledge as well. So I went up to making illustration for activity report. So actually even dry content can become a bit lively, and we can introduce many colors to this sort of environment. And I'm sure that it makes you more likely to dive into further information. With Jorge, we also worked on various media, like a brochure for Prime, a Cosmos Prize that might happen later, that is already existing in other countries in Europe, and so we've been working on the communication for it to maybe happen in Spain as well. And we've tried to communicate about topics from cosmology, so very large-scale universe, astroparticles, and how to put them together. So here we come to UNDARK, the project within which I'm working, and UNDARK is mainly focused on finding dark matter, if possible at all. And so for me, drawing dark matter. So I've made the logo with Jorge. We worked on the GTC, which is emblematic of La Palma in general, the observatory of the Canary Islands. The yellow also reminds of the Canary Islands. And we've got the percentage of ordinary matter and the matter we can directly observe, and we can see that a lot is yet to discover. So this is like a pie chart. And that was a way to just introduce what is UNDARK by a simple telescope and just seeing directly what's the objective. So we worked on many sort of media and trying to create a broad identity from this logo, because the logo is only the start of your identity, and then you develop around it. You choose colors, you choose an environment, style, etc. So this was the first banner for the press release, and we've continued to do that even for more technical press releases. So here I work with Andres and Jorge on this representation of many black holes. So here the idea is not really to represent actually what it would look like if we took a photo, but give an impression of the main theory behind the article. And here you can also see the colors that are appearing again, and the yellow and the black are very much the identity of UNDARK. And we also work on a poster, so that's for the upcoming workshop for UNDARK. And I wanted to show that because it's very important when you start doing layout in general, to start with sketches to see where your intentions are going. And it's one thing to have an idea in your head, but actually when you start to put it on paper, it's just the problems arise, but also new ideas. And so it's how we came with the first poster here. And you can see also the cone of light that is being used again, and that gives a real feeling of identity all along. And I also did sketches, many sketches, hoping to do more. Here was for the scientific school in Benasque. And it's also nice to document with drawings the different actions. See how people interact, how scientists learn, and also broadcast their knowledge. And so these are little testimonies also of the life of a lab, of schools, etc. So now let's present scientific content. So I will start to give some general advice. And for that, I wanted to show you how you start, whether you collaborate with a graphic designer or it's just you producing your own graphic design. You always start with a brief where you share your main intentions, so you can share them with the person you're working with, or just you write them down to know exactly the amount of content you will need. And then you clarify objectives and audience, so you need to adapt your content to the audience. You plan your layout and content, and that's where I think it's really useful to draw, even if you're not an illustrator. And then layout review. Many rounds of feedback are very important to keep accuracy, but also to optimize your design. And that's also important when you're not a graphic designer, to make sure to test on your audience that your graph is working, they communicate the right information. So first of all, and the most important, is to target your audience. You will not present your content the same way if you aim at your peers or if you aim at the general public. And that's very important to tailor the content so you can select the exact knowledge you want to transfer. And knowledge transfer is exactly that. It's disseminating knowledge, skills, expertise, or information from one individual or group to another. So you can communicate for researchers, to pupils, to students, to the general public. And I heavily recommend to not use the same slides for them all because some might get lost on the path. So for that, you can imagine what we call a persona in graphic design, and that's very useful also for product design. You imagine who would be your ideal target and what are their characteristics, and from the most general to actually some specific details that might help you get the personality of someone you might aim at. And so the most general is age, because you need to tailor your content, but just interests and needs can help you make a good color palette to make it lively or to make it look more serious, and also think about potential discrimination in your presentations and how you can be more inclusive. So the persona is just someone like, for example, you're going to say, oh, I'm going to aim at this person in the audience. What are this person's main characteristics and how do I adapt my content to this person? Keeping that in mind. And at the end of the design, you need to check that it still fits. So very important as well is to make sure that all the designs are accessible, and that's not so intuitive, and that, for example, I had hearing issues, and for me, a great exercise would be to look at my own talk and think, what would I hear with earplugs? What would I be able to get? Would I be able to understand the main content, or have I missed the whole information? And that's really important, and it works for any kind of impairment. Make sure that actually, even if someone can read very well from the front, make sure that it can be read from the end of the room, and you can also check that your projection work and the contrasts are still understandable, and also just representing minorities and make them feel included. So actually the recommendations suit their need as well. So a little example of how to start to work from a brief and a little sketch. Here, the idea was to visualize the birefringence of a pulsar's polarized radio wave emission. And the idea was, the main idea was to show polarization by those lines in red and to show a pulsar. And this is just the main idea. We see the composition, we see that there's a bit of a gap here, and we understand more or less what the concept, and from that we can discuss, see if it's actually correct, and then move to the next stage and to finalization, which actually allowed me to develop various ways to show, for example, axion dark matter. The density of it is shown by topographic views, and that's just one mean among many others to represent that, because it hasn't necessarily been represented before. But there would be many options. That was one way to try it. I also, thanks to the drawing, I realized that it was lacking contrast, that we didn't really understand how the pulsar looked. So I added a little background. So many things that can be added little by little. And with Jorge, we decided that actually it would be good to add some more information so it relates to the publication it fits in, and to add a few equations and just the most important technical details. So you have a general view, you understand what is the topic, and you also have the most precise part that completely draws a link between the publication and the drawing. So it doesn't work only independently, but with the text. So now let's step into real graphic design. I will start by the main laws, and one I find very interesting for presentation is cognitive load. It was mainly theorized, or let's say at least coined, by John Sweller, and the idea is we can only intercept so much in the messages that are given to us, and the load needs to be limited. So there's an amount of mental effort that is required from the viewer to understand what we're showing, and that is called the cognitive load. And we have 3 types of cognitive load: the intrinsic load, extraneous load, and germane load. So the intrinsic load, you would think there's not much to do about it. It's the inherent difficulty of the material or the task itself. But actually, quite often, your image can get crowded with irrelevant information. So you can actually tailor your information and select what is the most important, because you won't have time to cover everything necessarily, or it won't be understandable. So that's already something that comes from within the content that can be adapted to your audience. Then the extraneous load, so that's more of a negative, and you want to reduce that. That's the mental strain due to poor presentation or design of information. So all what comes to distract you from the main information and doesn't help comprehension. So you want to limit all the things. It can be too many colors, it can be the content that is not aligned, so you have to circulate in page and it doesn't really make sense. Anything that makes you waste time and effort in understanding. And finally, the germane load is the mental work that supports learning and understanding, and that's a positive. That's anything that can really help draw connection between what the learner already knows, what has been presented, and the content we're aiming at. So it's really drawing connection and making systems that make understanding quicker, easier, more intuitive. Another thing that can really help both accessibility and efficiency is dual coding, and especially that's for presentations. Don't only rely on one source. So that doesn't mean that your slide needs to turn into a karaoke, but make sure that there are at least keywords on your slide that help you rely on text. At the same time, don't write it all, because people will spend their time reading. You want them to listen to you, but you want them to have a clue of what happened if they didn't pay attention. So you want to combine different media just to make sure that the message has been connected to at least one of your senses by one channel. So there are different types of channel. They can be text, image, sound. Basically, for example, adding a caption can really help in a diagram, and that's already 2 information because you have an image plus a caption. If on top of that, you describe what happened in the image, that's 3rd information, and so on. So basically, don't try to say exactly the same in your slides visually and what you say, but make sure that they're very complementary and they could work independently. Another important thing in graphic design is to help the eye flow. So the eye flow is the natural path of a viewer's eye, and it goes from a part of the design to another. So basically, even if you don't move yourself, actually your eye is going to move from one part of the page, for example, to another, and quite often it follows a pattern. This pattern is more conventional, actually, because of culture, because of the way we use to read, and quite often it follows a Z pattern or an F pattern. The F pattern is more like for website design. So usually you go to the menu is on the left, you read something, you can go back to the menu, down, and so on. The Z pattern is more like just classic reading, and that works not only for text, but also images. And you need to take that into account, because that's very natural to look at the top first, and that's where you want to put your title, for example. But that can be balanced by graphic design, and sometimes by making something bigger, you will change the eye flow. And the last thing, very important to present the product of your research, is to create a color palette. So this doesn't need to be the color palette of your whole existence, but it would be good if it was consistent, at least during your presentation. We know we are still in the same room talking about the same topic, and that we haven't moved to something different. And for that, it's very good to have I would say 2 to 3 identity colors. Here for UNDARK, it's yellow and black. And it's very useful because actually we already got a contrast that allows us a lot of possibility. And secondary colors, so be careful, it's not like the primary colors and secondary colors like cyan, magenta, blue, etc. It's more like in terms of how do you use that in a design. Secondary colors, they can be vivid, they can be to underline things, and they just add a bit of, they enrich your whole presentation, and they can also highlight different things. But I would say be careful with the secondary colors. Don't only rely on them to convey information, because some people might not be able to differentiate those colors. First, it's better if you think about your color palette in this sense, but it's really good to make sure that actually, for example, you draw an arrow and the arrow is red and there's another arrow that is green and it means something else. Well, make sure that you used your coding in this sense and maybe use a dashed line to differentiate the two arrows. Just add a bit more. Actually, it doesn't make the thing more crowded. It makes it just like using two different things makes it contrast, and that's very important. And lastly, it's good also to have some neutral colors, and they also help for contrast. For example, for text, usually you want to get close to black and white, so it's very easily readable, and that with neutral colors, they usually go with the rest of your palette, so that's helpful in general. And so about contrast, that's one of the most important things in slides. We have numbers to quantify that, and we use a contrast ratio, and the maximum contrast is 21:1, and it's basically black and white. Your slides don't have to be black and white. You can play a bit more, you can have a dark blue, some cream color, but you want to get close to that to make sure that your text is readable very easily. And that can be made not only with color, but you can rely on brightness, etc. And this is just an idea for numbers, but actually there's a very powerful tool online. Many websites do that, and you can use an online contrast checker. You enter the data of your color, the coordinate, and it tells you if your two colors contrast enough and gives you the ratio. So that can be helpful. You're going to use two colors for your whole presentation. You want to make sure that they contrast, and you have a bit more flexibility for headings because they will be bigger. So you don't have to optimize fully. You can use more colors, be free. But for the body of text, I mean the main text that will be smaller, you really need to highlight the contrast and make it stronger. So these are just minimums of contrast, but it also depends on size in general. So you can play on it, but that's the reference. And most importantly, that I see a lot, people using backgrounds, like beautiful backgrounds of galaxies or things with a lot of gradients, and it's stunning. It's nice to have a bit of atmospheric, let's say, dust in your slides, but not too much, and especially not when you use text. So here, I've written a text on my slide. That's a nice fusion of two black holes. So a lot going on, a lot of gradients, and you might be able to read the text, but honestly, I don't find it so easy. So first of all, what you can do to check that it's readable is that you readable. You can put your image in black and white, and you see the contrast in a straightforward way. It just like is the most instant way to see it. Here you see that it's really difficult to read the white, especially on the white waves. So that's a way to check it instantly, and it's a bit more instinctive. Otherwise, then when you've seen that there's no, I mean, it's more instinctive that the check of ratio and everything. So it's just like, let's make it easy. And when you see that it's not readable, you can still use your image if you really like it. So you can show it first, show all your stars, and then add either a layer in opacity, change the opacity globally to reestablish the contrast. And at some point, the text gets more important than the image. So you have to make a choice. Now let's see how you do that in practice. So first of all, how do you use a logo? Because quite often you have to put the logo of your project and apply it to a document, etc. The rules are quite easy, and usually they are described by brand manual that nobody reads because it's too long. But try to follow brand guidelines, and at least quite often they have images, and you can see how to use the margins to make sure that there's enough space between the different logos or the rest of your image. You also don't want it to come onto your text because nobody will be able to read nor the logo nor the text. That would be painful. And yes, make sure that it's legible. Be careful to scales, and use vector files ideally when you want to scale them up. Vector files are PDF, EPS, SVG, compared to pixelated files that are more like PNGs, JPEG, and they are fine to a certain extent. But as long as you want to scale them, even for web page, etc., if you have the other format, and you're able to open it, but usually PDF you are, just use that. That's safe. How do you make a diagram then? I won't explain all what goes through making a diagram because it's a long process, obviously, and you do that probably better than me. But the most important, I would say, is to leave inner and outer margins. That seems obvious, but it's really important when you put numbers, etc. You let it all breathe. Your diagram needs to be able to float in something and not being constrained in the middle, because it makes the information denser, less readable, slower. So think about those margins, and not only the outer margin, but also within, like how your text is stuck to your image, etc. And if you can, except from axis, I would make an exception, but try to make your captions horizontal. Otherwise, it's going to be a bit of a choreography in the room, and people will put their head like that just to be able to read it. Not so easy, so just put them like that if you can. Use arrows if needed, if it can free a bit of space, but just make it horizontal. For slides, then, so this is an artist's view of a galaxy, not so precise, but that's just for an example. So the most important is one slide equals one concept. You don't need more than that, because if you want to talk about another concept, you'll need more words, and you can always change slides then. So select your image, select your main content, one slide, one concept, efficient, and nobody gets lost. Use short text, that's quite obvious. And by that, I also include when you have a long title, try to cut it in two, so the line is not too long and people don't have to, well, same again, do a little dance to go to the end of the slide. So make it easier to flow. Use bullet points if possible, so no long sentence, don't make the whole sentence. People don't need to know the verb, etc., and dive into grammatical points while reading your slides. And limit the number of graphics. And really, I've put 1 to 4 graphics to be generous, but usually I wouldn't even advise it. 2 graphics is well enough to be able to read them. And also, if you can change just the size of each, so you really emphasize the one you're talking about, the most important, or the one with more information. So don't crowd it too much. And nobody's got time to read all the information, so you can describe what's happening, and just 1, 2 graphs are enough. Separate them, don't stick them, no glue needed. And what we talked about is the eye flow, and that's very important in a slide. So here I show how it goes, and it's actually a bit more complicated than just the Z pattern here, because you change size of material, and then it becomes more important. The image is going to draw attention, the text first at the top, and then little by little, you go to the captions, credits, things that are a bit less important. And so you can really do this gymnastic, and try look at it. When you look at your slide, try to draw the path and see if it makes sense. And if you have to make too many back and forth, it's a bad sign. And finally, the credits, don't forget them, and put them small but readable. Yeah, just try to mention them, especially for images. That's important for artists, and that's mandatory. And for a poster, basically we apply all what we've learned before, but it gets a bit more tricky. And to organize all that, and so that's less of a dive into an immense blank page, I would say you can start by drawing a grid. And a grid is really helpful because it helps you organize your content. It can be flexible. Not everything has to be stuck to the grid, but your text should follow a pattern and you should really easily know where your eye goes and follow the lines, and it should be very straightforward. So the grid really helps and it makes it more balanced in general. And one of the interesting things with grids, so you can have as many columns and lines as you want. And if you play like on a camera, with the rule of thirds, which is basically dividing your space in three, both vertically and horizontally. You've probably seen that in your camera when you have this little grid. And it helps you not only to make a hierarchy between the different parts of your content and a good composition, but there are also some points of interest that here are represented in red. Those red dots are excellent point to put important information. So here I decided to put the Big Bang. It could be something else. And the first galaxy, but it can be many things. And basically you can use that in photography, in painting, but also to make your poster. So if there's something in information you really don't want to miss, you know that your eye is going to go very quickly to it. And that's a great solution. It's like a magic trick. A little detail, but still important. Don't forget gutters. If you see that your lines are too long, you can divide them in 2 columns. So basically you organize all your text by blocks. And then you divide, if you see, for example, you need to have enough text to divide. And I would say it's good to have about 8 words per line at least, so it doesn't look too difficult to read, but just make sure that the gutter, and the gutter is just a little margin between the 2 blocks of text, and really helps breathe. Gutters are usually smaller than the other margins, and overall it makes the grid very coherent. So let's move to hierarchy. It's quite instinctive, but the same thing as on slide. You want to make sure that your title is bigger at the top and etc. And then you flow down. And the logos usually you would put in what I would call the blind areas, because nobody's going to be able to read your poster here unless they bend. So put all your logos, the thing that are not needed, and make sure that the rest of the space is well used. You can put your image bigger, just make it lively, make us bounce from a part to another, but elegantly, if possible. And finally, the balance between text and image. This is quite interesting because you want, usually on a poster, you want to have enough text and enough images so they are about equal, and they balance in such a way that you have the impression that you flow, and there's a sort of percentage that feels right. And you can also play on what we call negative space around. So that's all the space, like all actually the white space that is drawn, like when I put all those blocks, you can really see that there are some areas that are not used. And all that are like little Tetris blocks, and you can organize them. And when you put colors on that, you just realize, or you can just color them in black, you just realize how it balances. And so really think about each element like a little block, and you can make them simple, like just a rectangle, and just see how you can put all your rectangle on top of each other to make a good construction. To nearly finish, I would just briefly say that when you adapt and scale your content to other formats, it's a good moment also to reselect the amount of content, to reorganize it, and not just to copy and paste, because quite often you will have problems with scales, proportions, etc. Don't stretch your images. Just use that as a way to convey information, maybe in a different order, because that can be easy for a poster, but actually in a slide you will need less information. And just try to think about the ratio. For example, for slides, usually you work in 19:3, Is that not? Yeah. In 1900 per 1,000 more or less, and so you want to make sure that it is all balanced, but you won't be able to fit the same amount of information, and you need to check the resolution, for example, when you print, so it doesn't get pixelated when it comes out. So be careful to your images and rework on them, because it will show when you print them anyway. And to show you how I adapt myself content, for example, here I had made a brochure for a project called SciPol, again, about polarization. I'm a bit obsessed at this stage. And so I had made the whole content like that. And so it fits for, it's a sort of leaflet. So it's good to have quite dense information. It's going to be read in all in one. And here more technical content. So here is what I can fit in a brochure, and you would think, oh, if I make a poster or a slide, I could probably fit some more, but actually not, because when you print, you can just read and have quite small text, and otherwise you want actually less information. So here, the way I reshuffle content, for example, for a slide, I don't put my whole brochure in the slide. I just choose one element that is important, a sort of nice pile of crepes that represent different layers of observation and what can be selected to understand more thing about the CMB, for example. So the most important is the different layers. They can appear slowly, a background, something that reminds of the brochure, but definitely not as much information and credits. And here in the poster, actually, the posters are very big, but I fit about the same amount of information. There's maybe one more graph, but actually you need the poster to be readable from very far. So you increase the text, you reshuffle, and slowly you realize that actually what can fit in a brochure is about the same as a poster, and it can be read in a different way. And also what's important is, for example, a brochure, you don't have to care about what's at the bottom, for example, because you can read it. In a poster, you can't. So the landscape really helps to free a bit of space. The logos at the bottom, technical information very much in the middle, so we can look at it. And a few tips here. So I personally use professional layout apps and also apps to draw. So to draw, I draw on a tablet, for example, on Procreate or Photoshop. And for layout, I mainly use InDesign, part of the Adobe suite, which is relatively expensive. There are other options, for example, Affinity can be quite good and a cheaper alternative. But actually, I would recommend to use simplified apps where you can actually go through your whole layout, make it quite neat. For example, in Canvas, it's very efficient. You can also use little vectorial elements, add them, icons, etc. And they have templates. So don't be afraid to use templates. It makes sure that everything is quite consistent, and it helps you draw your content faster. So don't hesitate to use all that, and it's still quite versatile. Yeah, Adobe Express is another great option. So just to summarize and finish, the most important when you make a presentation, whether it's posters, slides, etc., is accuracy. You want to check your content, you anticipate it, you check your images, you make sure that everything is coherent. Then clarity, leave margins, leave a lot of space, and make sure that we read things in the right order, which moves us to hierarchy. Then accessibility, make sure that people can read or understand even if they have impairment. And then creativity, just because it makes it more attractive, and that doesn't have to stop you from using colors, interesting shape, and you can still have great compositions while using this rule, and sometimes you could break the grid. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope this will be helpful. And don't hesitate if you have any questions.
Thank you very much, Ève. Questions or comments? Okay. So Romano, maybe you can speak up if you want. Or
I will try. I'm here in La Palma. I don't know if you hear me.
Yeah, we hear you.
Eva, thank you very much for your presentation. That I think is very necessary because we have many things to learn to better explain what we do in general. My question was a bit different. It moves to a slightly different context. Is how much of the principle of design that you have presented today would apply also to other kind of presentations? For instance, the information in control panels in operation rooms, like control rooms in telescopes. So for a different kind of user, which is operators and astronomers, they have to use. Basically, I mean, we don't have much, this is my experience after many years in astronomy, don't have much experience in graphic design and UX, UE experience for operation, for instance, not only for dissemination of our knowledge. So I think we have also there a lot to learn, and we would like to ask you so how many of the principles you presented also apply there, or is what should we do in general? Yeah.
What is the end of the question?
What should we do in general? No, it's not only dissemination,
Yes.
also operation, if I understood you correctly, Romano.
Correctly. Yeah, correct. Thank you.
Yes, I think a lot of this principle actually apply to UX, especially those I have presented for slides and contrasts. I think there are more possibility in UX also because you can use digital colors, so the spectrum is bigger. I would say, for example, what is interesting with colors is when you do your palette, you really want to think about highlight colors. For example, for buttons, you want to put them forth. And so having a strong color that contrasts, for example, a red button, just simply, that stands out on a white background is really helpful. So all these things, and make sure that they are consistent, so you recognize what type of button works for what and for which action. What else could be applied? I would say, as I said, like, for example, the eye flow is a bit different on a screen. Well, especially because of functionalities and interaction. So we're really used to having menus on the side, for example. And so since we can interact and scroll, is a bit less linear in some way. So what I said about the F reading is quite different to the Z reading. And so you usually want to leave the most important or functional information on the left, and then go to the right to get further information, things like that. But basically, it's the same in a website or in a platform. Usually, there's a blind area, or there's a part that doesn't appear so quickly. So you want things to be at the bottom a bit less important, and hierarchy is also important this way.
Yeah.
So I think they all apply.
Maybe I can propose next time that the F comes, Romano, we can invite her to the observatories and, organize a visit. Maybe she has some ideas. So.
I have an idea.
Well, definitely. We are very interested in, because I think is one of our weaknesses is the way we present information to our own people working at the observatory. So you have to learn a lot about UX presentation in general. Also because we don't, quite frankly, we don't have the expertise in that. Mm-hmm. I know this is an area where even the university, there are masters, even people who learn about UX UI, but this is not the tradition, at least for engineers here in Spain. So it's really a weakness that we have, at least here in the observatory. Yeah.
May I say something that is also helpful? And that is used a lot in UX is dual coding, for example. And when you want a button to say send, for example, you can put a little envelope, so an icon plus the text, ideally. So when you don't have much space, you summarize it and you just keep the icon. But ideally, if you have more space, you double code, so text plus image, and helps you understand quickly where is the information. So it's both efficient and clear.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would be delighted to continue talking to you, but now as we're with more people, okay, I stop here my questions.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Romano. Questions in the room?
Thank you, Ève. Great presentation. I'm an artist as well, and I, up until now, typically keep my art and my science separate because they're just two different parts of my brain. But I'm wanting to incorporate more hand-drawn images in like my scientific talks, maybe even papers, if that's allowed. What would you, what is your advice for doing that and kind of balancing those with typical graphics that we usually see in talks and papers?
What are the main, could you repeat the question, please?
What do you have any guidance for like how many hand-drawn things you have versus, you know, typical graphics and like a talk, like how many is too many or something like that?
Well, first I would try to not keep them separate because it can be actually, sometimes we tend to make things a bit too flat, and it's really nice also, for example, to have hand drawings or things a bit more organic to balance or to give another vision, because when you do a drawing, you add an image, you add a new representation, so you add to the imagination globally. Yeah, and I think that's not unprofessional to add it. And what actually can make it more professional is if you put a drawing of yours or an image of yours, but you include it then in a grid, in a system that looks very neat, you can have something with a lot of personality, and it just complements and doesn't look unprofessional. It just makes it more lively. So I think I would encourage you to do so in general. And the same principles apply. Just avoid to crowd it too much, to say too much with images or gradients. Sometimes just like contrasting your images, or just like with outlines, you can say things in a more efficient way. Or if you want to show more like a bigger picture and the environment, I think that can all be nice. Did that answer more or less?
Yeah, thank you.
In any case, if it's going to be one more day here, today and tomorrow, so you can ask her any questions. Theo?
Thank you. It was a wonderful presentation. I learned a lot. I have one question. So sometimes, for some reason, you in the same presentation, within the same talk, you need to discuss two topics that are very different. Imagine you are dealing with two projects. Which will be your approach? For instance, changing the colors will be a right approach, or maybe something more subtle?
That's interesting. There are many ways to show it. That could be, for example, that can be just a change of color palette. Like you had for example, two main colors for the first part of the presentation. You keep one, so that's still consistent, and you change the secondary one. That can be a way to make sure that actually doesn't look too far away from each other. That could be changing the style slightly, or for example, one would be a bit more visual, something like that. Or you could also signal it by just like having a logo at the top, and you know that you're changing. I think it's also nice just to have a slide of transition. So for example, like it's also good because it can give a bit of rhythm. So usually you work on white backgrounds, as suddenly there's a color that comes to clash, and that wakes you up, and you know that you're moving to the next topic. Yeah, they can be also like having a little banner. They can be having something on the side, a little stripe of color, anything that can signal an icon. Yeah. Or you could also even have a slide of transition with the two in two columns and see the switch. There are many ways to do it.
Okay, do we have more comments or questions? I don't see. Yeah. Yeah. Can we share the slides with the
Yes,
people
sure.
somehow? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
We will send an email with some link. We'll see how to, maybe to the cloud IEC, to download the slides. Okay. If you don't have any more questions, let's thank Ève again for her beautiful talk. And that's it.
Encantado porque he visto, por ejemplo, en este tercera.